This is our lake. You don't belong here.
She said that to my face. The woman had never met me, didn't know my name, but she looked me dead in the eye and told me I didn't belong, standing on the shore of Mill Lake, deed in hand, my name on the title. Behind her, 11 boats on my docks, 11 families, 11 summers, free. No contract, no payment, not even $1. Dolores stepped closer, jabbed her finger at my chest, started waving the neighbors over.
Everyone, this man is trying to take our lake.
People came out of their houses, started staring. Then she dialed 911.
Officer, there's a man trespassing on our community property. He's refusing to leave. Please hurry.
The officer came, read my deed, looked at her, said nothing. 24 hours later, 11 boats, 0 docks. And Dolores? She did that to herself. What would you do? Drop where you're watching from. You need to understand what Mill Lake actually is before you understand why any of this happened. It's not a glamorous body of water. It's not the kind of lake that ends up on postcards. It's 6 acres of dark, cold, fresh water tucked into a wooded corner of Clearwater Pines, a planned subdivision about 40 minutes outside of Fredericksburg, Virginia. The lake smells like pine resin and mud in the summer. In the morning, mist hangs low over it, and the frogs go absolutely insane. There's a rusted boat launch on the east bank and a short dock on the north side that's been repaired so many times with mismatched lumber, it looks like a Frankenstein project. I loved it immediately. I found it through an estate sale listing buried on the 3rd page of a county property auction site. The owner, a man named Harlan Beakey, 81 years old, no heirs, had passed the previous winter. The lake was listed as a separate parcel from the surrounding HOA land. It always had been. Harlan had owned it since 1987, and the subdivision had grown around it, the way a river grows around a stone. For years, residents had used the lake informally, the docks, the fishing, the 4th of July pontoon parade, all with Harlan's quiet permission. He'd never charged them. He was a generous man who liked being liked. I paid $47,000 for a 6-acre private lake with riparian rights, bottom rights, and a clear title. For context, the HOA had been paying Harlan exactly nothing. So had everyone with a boat on that dock. I grew up in Zanesville, Ohio, in a house where my father worked double shifts at a stamping plant, and my mother clipped grocery coupons like it was her second job. I am not a man who was handed things. I got my GED, went into construction, worked my way up to foreman, got burned by a contractor who walked off a job with $80,000 of my money, and spent the following 2 years learning everything about property law, contracts, and what it means to actually own something. That experience was expensive. It was also the best education I ever received. When I closed on Mill Lake, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Quiet. Like the thing I'd been building toward finally had a shape. I gave the HOA 1 week before they made their first move. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. HOA letterhead, clean and officious, signed at the bottom in aggressive blue ink. Dolores Schrank, board president, Clearwater Pines Homeowners Association. Dolores. Let me paint you a picture. 64 years old, retired branch manager from a regional bank, the kind of institution that charges you $12 to use your own money. She'd been on the HOA board for 9 years and president for 6. Her front lawn looked like a putting green. She drove a white Cadillac SUV and was known in the neighborhood for leaving printed notes on people's doors when their trash cans weren't brought in by 6 p.m. on collection day. The letter informed me, politely, in the way a threat is sometimes dressed in a blazer, that residents and guests accessing Mill Lake had historically operated under a community use arrangement, and that the board would require me to submit a lake use permit application before continuing operations. The permit fee was $1,200, renewable annually, subject to board approval. Subject to board approval, for my own land. I read it twice, then I read it a 3rd time. Then I set it on the kitchen table next to my deed, my riparian rights documentation, and my title insurance certificate, and I made a pot of coffee. The gravel crunched under my boots when I walked out to check the dock that evening. 11 boats, none of them mine. I started making calls. My response to Dolores took me about 20 minutes to write and about 45 seconds to sign. I thanked the board for their warm welcome to the neighborhood. I noted respectfully that my property deed, recorded with the county clerk, insured by a title company, and entirely free of any HOA covenant language, did not reference a lake use permit, a community use arrangement, or any fee schedule controlled by Clearwater Pines. I informed them I would not be submitting an application or a check. I wished Dolores a pleasant autumn. I mailed it certified. Return receipt. The receipt came back signed in handwriting so aggressive it tore slightly through the paper. Within 4 days, every household in Clearwater Pines received the October edition of the Pines Post, the HOA's monthly newsletter, printed on cream cardstock that smelled faintly of a Kinko's at 2 in the morning. I know because my neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Harriet, brought me a copy with her eyebrows raised so high they nearly left her forehead. The newsletter described the new lake owner as someone who had expressed hostility toward community traditions and was potentially planning to restrict access to shared recreational resources. There was a quote from Dolores expressing her deep concern for the safety and continuity of our community's way of life. I had sent one polite letter declining to pay $1,200 for a permit to stand on my own land. Somehow, this had become a safety issue. I took photographs of the newsletter. I sent them to a defamation attorney in Richmond. She told me it was borderline, but worth documenting. Keep every copy, she said. Newsletters like this have a way of escalating. They did. The bigger legal drama, though, was the prescriptive easement threat. The HOA's second letter, which arrived 9 days after my response, was written in proper legal language, clearly drafted by an actual attorney. It claimed that residents of Clearwater Pines had been using Mill Lake openly, continuously, and without interruption for over 10 years, and that this use may have created a prescriptive easement, a legal right to continue using the property regardless of current ownership. Now, here's the part where I need to explain something, because this is exactly the kind of legal ambush that works on people who don't know what they're dealing with. A prescriptive easement is real. It exists in Virginia law. If someone uses your land without your permission, openly and continuously, for 15 or more years, they can potentially claim a legal right to keep doing it. It's the legal cousin of adverse possession, the squatter's rights concept most people have vaguely heard of. The key word in that whole explanation is without your permission. Harlan Beakey gave them permission. Informal, neighborly, handshake and smile permission, but permission. And permissive use is the kryptonite of prescriptive easement claims. The moment a landowner allows you to use the property, the clock on prescriptive easement doesn't just pause. It never starts. Because the legal theory requires the use to be adverse, meaning the owner objected or was unaware. Harlan was aware. Harlan invited people to fish off his dock. He just never wrote any of it down. Takeaway. Permissive use, even informal, verbal permission, legally destroys a prescriptive easement claim. My real estate attorney, a sharp, methodical man named Braddock Fells, who had been practicing property law in Northern Virginia for 22 years, had reached out to 3 people who had spoken directly with Harlan about using the lake. One of them had a birthday card from Harlan that literally said, "Come fish whenever you want, you're always welcome." It was written in shaky ballpoint ink on a Hallmark card with a largemouth bass on the front. Braddock was almost cheerful when he called me. Their prescriptive easement argument has about the same structural integrity as wet cardboard, he said. We can defeat this easily, but it's going to cost them legal fees to find that out. Good, I thought. In the meantime, the social pressure inside Clearwater Pines was building like steam in a pipe. Dolores had held an emergency community forum in the clubhouse. The kind of meeting where refreshments are provided, but the real agenda is manufactured outrage. I wasn't invited. A resident who attended told me later that Dolores had stood at the front of the room and said, "We need to protect what we've built here. This is our community." The thing she never said, not once, was that they'd been using a dead man's lake for free for over a decade without a contract, a payment, or a legal right. The crunch of Harriet's footsteps on my gravel driveway the next morning brought better news. She had a folder. "I found something in my attic," she said, "that you're going to want to see." Harriet Obenhouse had been Harlan's next-door neighbor for 14 years. She was 71, taught 4th grade for 3 decades before she retired, and had the organizational instincts of someone who never lost a permission slip. When Harlan's health started declining in his final years, he'd given her a banker's box, the brown cardboard kind, with the metal reinforced edges, and told her it was just some papers, and to hold on to it for a while. She'd kept it in her attic under a shelf of Christmas decorations, not thinking much of it. After my situation with the HOA started circulating through the neighborhood, she dug it out. Inside, among the property tax receipts and old utility bills, was a 4-page document printed on plain white paper, a draft agreement, dated March 2019. Harlan Beakey, property owner, and the Clearwater Pines Homeowners Association. It outlined a formal lake access lease, $3,600 annually, renewable every 3 years, granting residents dock and recreational rights in exchange for maintenance contributions and liability insurance. At the bottom of the 4th page, above 2 blank signature lines, someone, Harlan in that same shaky ballpoint, had written, "Sent copy to board, waiting to hear back." Stapled behind it, a certified mail receipt showing delivery to the HOA's registered address. March 14th, 2019. They had received it, they had signed for it, and then they had done absolutely nothing. No response, no negotiation, no counteroffer. They had looked at a proposal from an 81-year-old man who was offering them a reasonable, legal path to keep using his land, and they had chosen to ignore him until he died. I sat with that for a long minute. The coffee on my counter had gone cold. Somewhere outside, a woodpecker was doing its best to destroy one of my pine trees. Then I scanned every page and sent them to Braddock. "This," Braddock said when he called back, "changes the posture of this entire situation." He explained it in terms even a county code inspector could follow. The HOA's failure to respond to Harlan's offer wasn't just bad manners. Combined with the earlier newsletter defamation and the prescriptive easement threat, it formed a pattern, a documented pattern, of the HOA knowingly using private property without consent, ignoring formal requests to formalize the arrangement, and then attempting to legally bully the new owner into submission. That's not a neighborhood dispute. That's tortious interference and potentially unjust enrichment. In plain English, they got something valuable for free. They knew they shouldn't have it for free, and they're now fighting to keep it. The dock inspection was Dolores's next move. 4 days after we found Harlan's box, a county code enforcement officer named Randy appeared at Mill Lake with a clipboard. He walked the dock. He tested the boards. Some bounce, some creak, the smell of weathered wood and old lake water. Took photographs, checked his paperwork. Then he looked at me and said, "This is in fine shape for its age. No violations. You're good." He was there for 11 minutes. That evening, a post appeared in the Clearwater Pines Facebook group, run by a Dolores ally named Phyllis, announcing that county authorities had been out to investigate the new lake property. No clarification that the inspection had found nothing, just the implication, hanging there like smoke. I would have been frustrated, but I was busy with something else. On a hunch, or maybe it was habit from 20 years of checking paperwork on job sites, I went through the county permitting database. It's public record, searchable by parcel number. I put in Harlan's old parcel number and filtered for the last 5 years. There it was, a dock construction permit application. Filed October 2021. Applicant, Clearwater Pines Homeowners Association. Parcel, Harlan Beakey, private. Rejected. County notes, applicant does not hold ownership or recorded easement for subject parcel. The HOA had tried to build a permanent structure on land they didn't own. The county told them no, and then they went right back to pretending the lake was theirs. Takeaway. County permit databases are public record, and they don't lie about who tried to claim what. I printed that page. I put it in a folder next to Harlan's draft lease, the certified mail receipt, the defamatory newsletter, and the code enforcement report showing 0 violations. The folder was getting thick. That's usually when the other side starts to feel the floor shift. Dolores, meanwhile, was doubling down. The petition showed up taped to the mailbox kiosk at the entrance of Clearwater Pines on a Wednesday morning. Clean white paper, HOA letterhead, a headline in bold, "Protect our lake, restore community access." Below it, a line for names. By Sunday, Dolores was announcing at the next board meeting that 180 residents had signed. She called it an overwhelming mandate. For reference, Clearwater Pines has 340 homes. 180 signatures is 53%, which is, technically, a majority of a very small margin, and also a number that means 160 households either refused to sign or simply didn't care. But Dolores didn't mention that part. What Dolores did next was harder to ignore. I was at the mailbox kiosk on a Thursday afternoon, sorting through the usual: a Lowe's circular, a water bill, something from the county assessor, when I heard the distinct crunch of Cadillac tires on fresh asphalt. The white SUV pulled up slow, the way vehicles pull up when the driver wants you to notice. She got out, visor, fleece vest, the expression of a woman who has been rehearsing this moment in her bathroom mirror. "Mr. Wolfson." She said my name like it was a diagnosis. "Dolores. I think you know why I'm here. I assume it's not to return the $36,000 worth of free lake access your board has been enjoying." That landed. She pivoted. "This neighborhood is a community. People have traditions here. Children learn to fish on that lake. And you come in and—" She paused, doing something with her jaw. "People like you don't understand what it means to build something." People like you. Virginia is a one-party consent state. That means if you're part of a conversation, you can record it without telling the other party. My phone had been in my shirt pocket, screen down, recording since she got out of the car. The audio was clean. You could hear the wind in the pines, the distant hum of a leaf blower 3 streets over, and Dolores shrank, telling me I didn't understand community. I thanked her for her time. She drove away. The HOA's attorney letter arrived the following Tuesday. It was thorough and aggressive, as hired gun letters tend to be, citing Virginia common law, referencing 15 years of continuous community reliance, invoking the language of equitable servitude. It demanded Garrett Wolfson cease interference with established recreational use and engage in good faith negotiation to restore access. Braddock read it and called me with the energy of a man who had just been handed exactly what he wanted. He drafted our response over 3 days. It was 8 pages. It cited the 2019 lease offer and certified mail receipt. It cited the unjust enrichment doctrine, the legal principle that you cannot accept a benefit without compensation if a reasonable person would expect to pay for it. It cited the county permit rejection, proving the HOA knew the land was private. It included a transcription and audio file reference of Dolores's "people like you" comment, and at the end, it presented a demand: retroactive lease payments of $3,600 per year for 3 years, totaling $10,800, plus a formal, signed acknowledgement that Mill Lake was private property, not subject to any community right. Takeaway: unjust enrichment is a real legal doctrine, and "we've always done it this way" is not a defense against it. But the best piece came from the C, and Rs, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that govern Clearwater Pines. These are the HOA's own founding documents. Braddock had ordered a copy weeks earlier, the kind of document that gets filed with the county when a subdivision is first platted. He'd been reading through it methodically, the way a good attorney reads things, looking for the thing no one else looked for. He found it on page 31, section 7. 4. The association shall not pursue financial claims, liens, or legal actions against non-members or owners of non-annexed parcels without first obtaining a court order confirming jurisdiction. Garrett Wolfson was not a member of Clearwater Pines HOA. Mill Lake was a non-annexed parcel. It had never been absorbed into the HOA's governance structure. The HOA had been threatening legal action against someone they had no legal standing to threaten, a violation of their own governing documents. Their own rules said they couldn't do this. Braddock included section 7.4 on page 3 of the response letter, underlined. We sent it certified mail, and then we waited. The waiting part is always the interesting part. It was a Thursday evening when Braddock called, and I could tell from the 3-second pause before he started talking that whatever he'd found was significant. "Garrett," he said, "have you looked carefully at where exactly the dock structures sit?" I had a survey map. I pulled it out and spread it on the kitchen table under the overhead light. The paper slightly yellowed at the edges, the property boundary lines drawn in that precise, bureaucratic blue ink that surveyors use. I looked at the North Shore. I looked at the East Bank, the dock structures, 3 of them, including the big two-slip platform where the nicer boats tied up, sat on the lake's shoreline. And the shoreline, on this parcel, was entirely within Harlan's original property boundary. All of it. The HOA's property ended at a setback line roughly 30 feet from the water's edge. That setback had always been Harlan's. Now it was mine. The docks, I said. They built the docks on my land. All 3 of them, Braddock said. I pulled the 2016 special assessment records. The board raised $22,000 from homeowners specifically to fund dock construction and improvements. They hired a contractor. They built on the Beek parcel, on what is now your parcel, without a recorded easement, without a lease, without permission, just built. I sat down. Here's the legal principle that mattered. In Virginia, as in most states, structures permanently affixed to land are considered part of the real property. They transfer with the deed. You can't build a house on someone else's lot and then claim the house is yours when the lot sells. The same logic applies to boat docks, piers, and any other fixed structure. When I bought Mill Lake, I bought everything on it and attached to it, including the docks the HOA had funded with a $22,000 homeowner assessment. Takeaway. Structures permanently attached to land belong to the landowner, even if someone else paid to build them. What made this particularly sharp was the downstream implication for the residents themselves. These were homeowners, real people, families, people who had scraped together their share of a special assessment because they wanted nicer docks. They'd been told by their board that they were investing in community infrastructure. What they'd actually done was fund construction on private land the board had no right to build on, and no one had ever told them. Dolores and her board had approved a $22,000 construction project on land they did not own, did not lease, and had no legal claim to occupy. They had done this knowing, because of Harlan's 2019 letter, that he wanted payment and a formal agreement. They had ignored him, spent the money anyway, and collected dues and special assessments from their own neighbors on the basis of an asset they had no right to offer. That's not just a property dispute. That's a board that had been misrepresenting the community's assets to its own members for years. I looked at the survey map for a long time. The pine trees outside were doing their evening thing, moving slightly in the wind, the sound a little like white noise through the walls. Then I picked up the phone and called Braddock again. I want to know, I said, exactly how far we can take this. Pretty far, he said. Let me tell you what comes next. There's a particular kind of satisfaction in moving from defense to offense. It feels different in the body, less reactive, less tight, more like construction. You're building something now, not just patching holes. Braddock and I spent 2 evenings at his office in Fredericksburg, his conference table covered in survey maps, CC and R printouts, and a legal pad where he'd written a 3-phase plan in the kind of handwriting that only attorneys and doctors seem to have. Technically legible, slightly threatening. Phase 1 was the formal notice of ownership. Braddock would send a certified letter to the HOA stating clearly, with legal citations and the survey documentation attached, that the dock structures on Mill Lake were located on Garrett Wolfson's private parcel, and therefore constituted real property, transferred with the deed. The HOA would have 30 days to respond. This wasn't a negotiating tactic, it was a legal position. We were putting it in writing, creating a record, making it real. Phase 2 was a quiet title action filed in the county circuit court. This is a legal proceeding that asks a judge to formally confirm who owns a disputed piece of property. It's not dramatic, no jury, no fireworks, but it's permanent. A quiet title judgment is recorded in the public record. It ends the argument forever. Takeaway. A quiet title action is how you permanently settle who owns what in a way courts and title companies will respect for decades. Phase 3 was the settlement lever, the unjust enrichment claim. $10,800 in retroactive lease payments was the sword we'd hold while the quiet title action proceeded. The HOA could either acknowledge the ownership reality and negotiate fair terms going forward, or they could fight in court, spend thousands in attorney fees, and lose anyway when the judge looked at the survey map for approximately 30 seconds. The padlocks I ordered arrived on a Thursday, 16 of them, hardened steel shackles, keyed alike. I spread them out on my workbench in the garage, next to a box of private property signs, heavy-gauge aluminum, UV-resistant lettering, the kind that doesn't curl in the rain. I'd ordered 20. one for each major access point. I also ordered something else. A simple, quiet thing. A set of gate hinges and a hardware kit for a swing gate. Not yet installed, just ready. Harriet agreed immediately when I asked if she'd be willing to submit a written affidavit describing finding Harlan's documents and her recollection of his conversations about the lake access arrangement. She showed up at Braddock's office in a blazer, sat down at the conference table, and gave a signed statement that was 6 pages of precise school-teacher recall. Braddock told me afterward that she was the best witness he prepared in 5 years. The county commissioner's aide was a young man named Theron, who'd been assigned to constituent services and had a quiet, controlled anger about HOA abuse that suggested a personal history with the subject. He couldn't act officially without a formal complaint, but he pointed me to the Virginia HOA Disclosure Act, a state law requiring that any seller within an HOA provide buyers with a complete and accurate disclosure of all assessments, liabilities, and material facts about community assets. If the board had been representing the dock infrastructure as a community asset in those disclosures for years, and they had been, it was in the annual budget summaries, then every home sale in Clearwater Pines during that period potentially involved a material misrepresentation. That was a regulator's problem, not mine. But I passed the information along to Theron and let him think about it. The journalist's name was Cecilia Drum. She covered local government and property law for a regional paper based in Fredericksburg, and she had written 3 previous stories about HOA overreach in Northern Virginia. She didn't promise me anything. She said she'd look into it. That was enough. The letter to homeowners was the piece I wrote myself. Not a legal document, just a letter. 1 page, plain language. It laid out the property history, the 2019 lease offer, the permit rejection, the dock construction. It didn't accuse anyone of anything. It just said, here is what happened. Here is what the records show. And I want you to know the truth before this goes further. I had it notarized, not because it needed to be, but because it made it feel serious. It was. I would mail it one day before filing the quiet title action. Everything was staged. The padlocks, the signs, the gate hardware, the letters, 16 pieces of a machine I'd spent 6 weeks building. I was almost ready. The HOA's new attorney was named Prescott, and everything about his letters suggested a man who billed in 6-minute increments and enjoyed it. The response to our Phase 1 notice was 19 pages, single-spaced, citing cases from 3 different decades and using the phrase continuous and uninterrupted community reliance 11 times. Braddock counted. It's well written, Braddock said, in the tone of a man who is not worried. It's also a losing argument. They know that. This is delay theater. Dolores's counter-campaign ran alongside the legal posturing like a secondary infection. By the second week of November, the Clearwater Pines Facebook group had become a scroll of anxiety. She'd been telling people, in the way that people like Dolores tell things, casual, concerned, never quite provable, that Garrett Wolfson wasn't just a private buyer, that there were investors involved, that he had plans for the lake, a commercial marina, someone posted, a boat rental business, said another. One comment speculated about a hotel. I was a 43-year-old former foreman who had bought a lake because I liked the sound it made in the morning. I had no investors. I had a folder of deeds and a box of padlocks. 2 anonymous letters were slipped under the doors of Harriet and Theron within the same week. Nothing threatening, carefully calibrated to stay on the right side of harassment law, but unmistakably designed to pressure. Harriet said she was putting her standing in the community at risk. She brought it to me with the same expression she probably used when a 3rd grader tried to lie about their homework. I've dealt with bullies before, she said. The signed complaint was almost funny. Dolores filed a formal complaint with the HOA's architectural committee, claiming my private property / no trespassing signs violated the subdivision's aesthetic guidelines for signage. The county code office responded in writing. I received a copy, explaining, with the patience of someone who had done this before, that Garrett Wolfson's parcel was a non-annexed private property, not subject to Clearwater Pines CC&R provisions. The signs were legal. The complaint was closed. I framed that letter. It's on my garage wall now. But the real discovery came from an unlikely source. A Marina worker named Colby, who did seasonal dock maintenance in the area and had serviced the Clearwater Pines docks for years. He'd heard about the dispute through the contractor network, Small-town information travels fast, and he reached out through Harriet. Over coffee at a diner on Route 1, Colby told me something that made me set down my cup. Dolores Schrank kept her boat, a 22-foot pontoon, white with navy trim, purchased 6 years ago, in slip number 3 at Mill Lake's North Dock. Not because she'd been assigned it, not because she paid for it, because she was board president, and she'd simply decided slip 3 was hers. No documentation, no transfer, no payment. She'd photographed that boat from that dock for her annual holiday card, which she sent to 400 people for 6 years running. The slip, like the dock beneath it, like the land the dock sat on, was mine. Colby had records, maintenance logs going back to 2018, with boat descriptions and slip assignments scrawled in the margins. Slip 3, Schrank pontoon. Every season, consistent as the tides. I thought about Dolores standing at the mailboxes, telling me I didn't understand what it means to build something. About the newsletter calling me hostile. About the 911 call, the code enforcement visits, the anonymous letters to Harriet, the 19-page legal delay memo. All of it, every single move, was a woman desperately protecting her access to something she'd taken and never paid for. I added Colby's maintenance logs to the folder. Then I went home and called Braddock and told him it was time to stop being patient. "The quiet title filing goes in next week," I said. "Already drafted," he said. "We've been ready." "And the padlocks?" There was a short pause. "That's your department." I looked at the 16 padlocks lined up on my workbench. The hardened shackles caught the garage light and threw small, clean reflections on the wall. Outside, it was cold. The lake would be still by now, dark and glassy, the boats sitting on their slips like they owned the place. For one more week, they did. The letters hit on a Wednesday morning. 340 homes. Buff envelopes, hand-addressed labels. A touch Harriet suggested, because hand-addressed mail actually gets opened. Inside, a single page, no letterhead, just the facts, laid out in plain paragraph form. Harlan's ownership history, the 2019 lease offer, the certified delivery receipt, the permit application rejection, the dock construction on private land, the title transfer that made it mine. No insults, no accusations, just the record. By noon, the Clearwater Pines Facebook group had more posts than it had generated in the previous 6 months combined. Did anyone else read this letter? Is this true? The docks aren't on HOA land? I paid $340 in the 2016 special assessment. For what? By 4 o'clock, Dolores had posted a response, calling the letter manipulative misinformation from someone with financial motives. She did not dispute a single specific fact in it. She couldn't. The facts were recorded at the county courthouse. The board tried to convene an emergency session that Thursday evening. Dolores needed a quorum, 4 of the 7 board members present, to conduct official business. 3 of them called in sick, or unavailable, or offered excuses ranging from the plausible to the transparent. One of them, a quiet accountant named Ferris, who had been on the board for 2 years and had spent most of that time looking increasingly uncomfortable, called me directly. He'd read the letter. He'd pulled the county records himself. He wanted me to know that he had not known about the permit application rejection or the 2019 lease offer, and that he intended to consult a personal attorney before attending any more board meetings. I thanked him. I told him there were no hard feelings toward people who'd been kept in the dark. Dolores's filing attempt was the move of someone running out of options. She went to the county recorder's office with a handwritten notice of disputed ownership, a legal document that, if accepted, would cloud the title and potentially freeze any sale or refinancing of the parcel by flagging an ownership dispute in the public record. It's a real mechanism, and it can cause real problems. It's also only available to people with a recorded legal interest in the property, lien holders, easement holders, co-owners. The county clerk looked at Dolores's document, looked up her name in the system, found 0 recorded interests, and declined to file it. She was asked to leave the counter. I heard about this from Theron, who had a contact at the recorder's office. He told me with the particular satisfaction of someone who has seen bureaucracy, for once, actually work correctly. Meanwhile, the physical preparations were complete. Braddock had confirmed that Virginia law was unambiguous. As the owner of the real property to which the docks were permanently affixed, I had the legal right to secure them. A trespasser, meaning anyone using the docks without my permission, could be removed by law enforcement if they refused to leave. The padlocks were not vandalism. They were not harassment. They were a property owner exercising the most basic right of ownership, the right to decide who does and does not have access. The HOA's 4th of July dock party was scheduled for a Saturday. Every year, residents launched their boats, floated out onto the lake, and tied up to watch the fireworks from the water. Dolores coordinated it. She had a spreadsheet, I was told. She had a slip assignment chart. That party was in 6 days. Harriet and I sat on my front porch the evening after the county filing rejection, the air carrying the smell of freshly cut grass and the distant sweetness of someone's backyard grill 2 streets over. The sun was going low. The lake would be orange and pink right now. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Ready," I said. She nodded. She handed me a thermos of coffee. It was the good kind, the kind that smells like it means it. "You know," she said, "Harlan would have liked you." "I think he'd have liked what's about to happen," I said. She laughed. It was the kind of laugh that meant yes, absolutely, and also, yes. 6 days. 5:31 a.m. on the 4th of July, and Mill Lake was the most peaceful place on earth. Colby and I worked without talking much. The lake was a mirror in the gray pre-dawn light, flat and still, the color of old pewter. Somewhere in the cattails, a red-winged blackbird was warming up. Our boots left dark prints in the dew-soaked grass as we carried the gate hardware to the first dock access point, the air tasting faintly of iron and lake water. The padlocks went on in order, North Dock first, East Bank access point second, the South launch ramp third. I posted the private property signs at every entrance, 4-foot aluminum stakes hammered into the ground with a rubber mallet. Each strike a clean, solid thunk in the quiet morning. 16 locks, 12 signs, 1 swing gate installed on the main dock path, hinges set, hasp closed, keyed. We were done by 6:14 a.m. I drove home, made breakfast, watched some of the morning news. Then I drove back to the lake at 8:45 a.m. and parked on the gravel strip near the launch ramp, which was now gated. I brought a folding chair, a thermos, and a manila folder. The first resident arrived at 9:07 a.m. He had a kayak strapped to his roof. He walked to the launch ramp gate, saw the padlock, looked at the sign, looked at me. "Morning," I said. He did not respond. He pulled out his phone. By 9:40 a.m., there were 11 people at the lake, none of them in boats, all of them on their phones. The sound of the holiday morning, distant fireworks somewhere in the county, a kid yelling 2 streets over, a lawnmower that someone had decided was appropriate at this hour, continued around them, indifferent to their situation. Dolores arrived at 9:52 a.m. in the white Cadillac. She got out with the energy of someone who had been on the phone for an hour. Behind her, 2 board members I recognized from photographs. Slightly behind them, Phyllis, phone raised, recording. "You need to remove these locks right now," Dolores said. "Good morning, Dolores. This is illegal. This is harassment. This is my property," I said. "Would you like to see the deed?" She called 911 at 10:03 a.m., the same dispatch line. The officer who responded, a different one from the first visit, younger, with the quiet efficiency of someone briefed before leaving the station, arrived at 10:19. He reviewed my binder, deed, quiet title filing confirmation number, survey, Braddock's letter of legal counsel confirming the action was lawful. He was thorough. He took about 8 minutes. Then he turned to Dolores. "Ma'am, the property owner has the right to secure his property. The locks are legal. There's no violation here. He is preventing residents from accessing private property they don't have a recorded right to access," the officer said, with the gentle firmness of someone who has delivered this kind of news before. "I can't help you with that." Cecilia Drum had arrived at 10:10. She had a photographer with her, a young woman who moved quietly and got angles Cecilia pointed to. Theron stood near the tree line in a gray jacket, watching without making himself a participant. About 40 residents were gathered now. The holiday had brought people out. Some were angry at me, some were reading the signs carefully, some were talking quietly to each other with the look of people doing math. I stood up from the folding chair. I had a single page of prepared remarks in my folder. I'd written them over 3 evenings. I read them. I described Harlan Beakey, a generous man who asked for nothing and got nothing in return. Not even a response to the fair lease offer he mailed to the board 6 years before he died. I described the $22,000 that residents had paid in special assessments to build docks on land the board knew wasn't theirs. I read the date on the certified mail receipt. I said the board's attorney had argued in court filings that this was a dispute about community rights, but that when a man named Harlan tried to formalize those rights through a legal agreement, the board had simply ignored him until he was gone. Cecilia Drum stepped forward. Ms. Trank, there's a record showing the HOA received a lease proposal from Mr. Beakey in March 2019. Can you explain why the board didn't respond? The silence after that question was the longest 7 seconds I've ever measured. Dolores said, I don't recall. It was enough. Cecilia's article ran 8 days later. The headline was careful. Journalists are careful. But the subhead was not. HOA board spent $22,000 in resident funds on docks built on private land. It ran in the regional paper and got picked up by 2 Northern Virginia outlets before the weekend. Dolores Schrank resigned from the Clearwater Pines HOA board on a Tuesday afternoon. The official statement, drafted, I was told, by the board's attorney, said she was stepping down to pursue personal interests and to allow new leadership to guide the community forward. 3 other board members followed her within the week. Phyllis deactivated her Facebook account. The county commissioner's office opened a formal inquiry into the HOA's annual disclosure practices. I was not a party to that proceeding. I didn't need to be. Ferris convened the new board's first official meeting 6 days after the resignations. He called me himself to schedule the negotiation. It took 2 sessions, 2 weeks, and approximately 4 hours total. The final lease, $3,000 per year, 5-year renewable terms. Residents maintain recreational access to all 3 docks, cost sharing on annual maintenance, and a formal, recorded acknowledgement, filed with the county, attached to both properties' chain of title, that Mill Lake was private property, and that the access arrangement was a voluntary contractual license, not a right. The ratification vote was 291 to 22. The 22 were, I'm told, mostly people who had been particularly close to Dolores. I bear none of them any ill will. With the first lease payment, I replaced the Frankenstein dock. The old structure had been repaired so many times, it had become a philosophy more than a dock. I hired a local contractor named Everett Pace and a 2-man crew. It took 4 days. I supplied lunch on the last day, sandwiches from a deli in town, the bread thick and slightly warm, eaten at the edge of the new dock with our feet not quite touching the water. Everett said it was one of the cleaner jobs he'd done all summer. The new dock is level. The planks are treated pine, the color of honey in the afternoon light. There are 6 slips, clearly marked. Slip 3, Dolores's former slip, is now first come, first served. I sat on that dock on a Thursday evening in late August. The lake was doing its best impression of glass. A great blue heron was standing in the shallows on the far bank, patient as a courthouse, waiting. A kid from 3 houses down had asked, through his father, if he could fish off the dock, and I'd said yes, and he'd caught 2 bluegill and a small largemouth, and had been nearly incoherent with excitement. He didn't know anything about deeds or easements or CC and Rs. He just knew the fish were biting. I thought about Harlan. The Harlan Beak Fishing Education Fund was Harriet's idea, and I'm not too proud to say it was better than anything I had come up with. We established it that fall, a modest annual fund, seeded by a portion of the lease income, and matched by voluntary contributions from 31 residents who signed up in the first 2 weeks. It pays for local kids, ages 8 to 16, to attend a week-long outdoor recreation and conservation program run by the County Parks Department. First-generation anglers, kids who've never owned a rod. Harlan taught himself to fish from a library book when he was 11 years old. He would have liked this. First cohort, 12 kids. The summer after that, 19. The lake is still there. The mornings are still quiet. The mist still comes in low. And somewhere out there, in an HOA newsletter, in a Facebook group, in a parking lot argument about grass height or fence color, there's another story like this one waiting to happen. Maybe it's happening to you right now.